In Italy, smoke drifts over the Vatican roof above a cheering crowd, a first signal ushering in a new leader for over 700 million Roman Catholics, shortly after confirmation.
Habemus Papa.
Habemus Papam, literally, we have a pope, the 263rd Pope of the Roman Catholic Church, Cardinal Albino Luciani, Patriarch of Venice, to be known for the rest of his life as Pope John Paul I. Who the Pope is, what kind of man, what kind of leanings he has, and the decisions he'll make will touch the lives and mold the futures of followers the world over, from cradle to the grave and beyond. Choosing such a man is not a task to be taken lightly. There is no more important event in the Church than the election of a pope. After a special mass, 111 cardinals, princes of the Church, are locked away for secret ballots in the Sistine Chapel. Choosing a successor from the half-dozen or so likely candidates is normally an agonizing process. Responsibility weighs heavily. On this occasion, only one voting day was needed to settle on a virtual outsider, a performance unprecedented this century, and so remarkable, almost miraculous, that at least one cardinal suspected direct intervention by the Holy Ghost. In theory, any baptized Roman Catholic unmarried man can become pope. The possibilities before the cardinals in the chapel were not that vast, but the election was more open than ever before. Who to choose? One of the 85 non-Italians, perhaps a third world pope, a traditionalist or a progressive, a man with strong views, a moderate. It could have been a lengthy process, but the cardinals were anxious more than anything to show the unity of their church. It was probably this policy that led them to settle on the simple, uncontroversial pastoral Italian as Pope Paul's successor.
Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti descendat super vos et maneat semper.
Intriguing to the public is the new pope's choice of name. No pope before has adopted a double name. It's seen as a signal of his originality, also a clue to his intentions, perhaps, to continue in the footsteps of his predecessors, the reformer, John the 23rd, and the moderator, Paul VI. Maybe, too, there's a personal message in the name, for it was Pope John who made him a bishop and Pope Paul a cardinal. Forno di Canali in the Dolomite Alps of northeast Italy now boasts the most famous son in the country. Little Albino Luciani decided while still at school here that he would be a priest when he grew up, but he might not have dared dream of being pope. The village of just 700 people had followed his career with interest, but they were stunned by the news. First, they sent a telegram of congratulation. Then there was a special mass in the church of St. John the Baptist. Now the world's attention is focused on Forno di Canali and the working-class country priest born here to become monarch of the church, wondering how he'll fill the vacuum left by Pope Paul. Pope Paul's 15 years on the throne of St. Peter gave him great personal anguish. A liberal man, apparently suited to such times of change, in fact, he had to live with the conflict between his desire to progress and his duty to preserve the essence of Roman Catholicism, the need to move with the times without betraying religious beliefs too fundamental to be compromised. It all stemmed from the situation Paul inherited from his predecessor. Pope John had set up a second Vatican Council to discuss the direction in which the Church should move. John died before the council ended, and it was Paul who had to face the clamour for reform. In many ways, he proved surprisingly liberal, especially in reforms of the church service. He abolished the Latin Mass, and in doing so, he pleased some and mortally offended others. The man most opposed to changing the Mass was Bishop Marcel Lefebvre. His congregation at Lille in France persisted with the Latin version introduced in the 16th century. In doing so, he defied the Vatican, risked excommunication, and sparked off a fierce controversy among Catholic believers. The issue at Lille was not simply Latin versus French for Mass, but something far deeper, a basic disagreement between those who clung to hallowed traditions and those, like Pope Paul himself, who were prepared to allow the Church to adapt to the changing world. Here at Bedewijk in Holland, the liberals went so far as to let a pop group play at Mass. For traditionalists, like Lefebvre, it was confirmation of their worst fears. Other more progressive Catholics saw it as a move in the right direction. Pope Paul did find a pop Mass too radical. He also found himself squarely in the crossfire between impatient liberals and fuming conservatives. Another radical change proposed in Holland was for priests to be allowed to marry. On that, Pope Paul said a firm no, but he wasn't negative on all issues. Relations with communist countries and other churches both took forward strides. But no one man can satisfy the expectations of 700 million followers, the impossible task now facing Pope John Paul. Civiltà Cristiana is an organization of Catholics, conservatives faithful to tradition. Its leader is Franco Antico. Does he believe the new pontiff should continue along the lines of Pope Paul?
Noi crediamo che il pontificato di Papa Montini sia stato un pontificato fallimentare.
We believe that the pontificate of Montini was a failure from various points of view, from the religious point of view, from the pastoral point of view, from the dogmatic point of view, and even from the political point of view. We feel that never before, as during this pontificate, has the decorum and dignity of the Holy See reached such a low point. We feel that the new Pope should radically change politics, returning to the origins. The general feeling in Rome is that Pope John Paul should continue a program of cautious advance to direct the Church towards the 21st century. But what of reaction outside the papal city? For Roman Catholics in Europe, the Americas, Asia and Africa are all speculating, wondering how much attention the new Pope will give to their opinions and their troubles. In Poland, the vast majority of the population is Catholic. Though Poland isn't the only communist country to allow Catholics to worship, relations between church and government here are better than most. Pope Paul managed to lessen government hostility to Catholicism in communist bloc nations. He received several prominent communists in Rome, among them Mr. Podgorny and Mr. Gromyko from the Soviet Union, and President Tito of Yugoslavia, though the Pope himself was refused entry to Poland in 1966. Freedom for the Catholic Church in Poland today is greater than it's ever been, and church attendance is so popular that Sunday masses have to be staggered to allow everyone a chance to get in. Popular Word is a Catholic daily newspaper whose chief editor is Janusz Stefanowicz. He's also vice president of PAX, one of Poland's biggest Catholic organizations. How does Mr. Stefanowicz think the new Pope will influence matters in Poland?
Generally speaking, since World War II, there had never been such a good relation between church and state like now, especially after the meeting between Cardinal Primate of Poland, Cardinal Wyszyński, with Mr. Gierek, the first secretary of the Communist Party, and subsequent visit of Mr. Gierek to the late Pope. Certainly there are some problems, among others the question of mass media and the access of church to mass media, but I cannot imagine relations between any state and any church deprived of any problems. I think that if we follow this path of mutual understanding and mutual recognition, we may say that situation will be the best possible. I don't see any necessity to change the situation. It's rather the question to let it develop in good, positive direction. And I think the Pope will have full understanding of the Polish problems. One thing perhaps he could do in the future is to fulfill the intention, the idea of the late Pope, Paul VI, to come personally to Poland, where certainly he will be welcomed by Polish Catholics as their spiritual leader and by the Polish government as an important partner in European and all-world dialogue for peace and cooperation.
Relations between church and government are strained, though, in the Philippines, where 85% of the people are Catholics. President Marcos himself is a Catholic, and his wife, the Philippines' First Lady Imelda, was among the mourners at the funeral of Pope Paul. Even so, the Roman Catholic Church has remained the most persistent critic of the government and of President Marcos during 5 years of martial law. Though the Church here has said it's trying to avoid a clash, it has spoken out at all levels on torture and illegal arrests. The government has hit back by confiscating the printing works of 2 Catholic newspapers. On the subject of human rights, the Church refuses to be gagged, despite arrests and the deportation of its workers. The reason, says the clergy, is because the Church speaks for the ordinary people, champions their causes on issues such as deprivation and poverty. With so many of its people underprivileged, what does Asia expect of a new pope? We asked Father Catalino Aravali, a Jesuit and theologian at Manila University.
There is a desire that the Pope be a man who gives us a true sense of the profound humanity in the Church, the profound humanity of the Gospel, that he awakens a great deal of hope in human hearts, especially for the poor, for those who suffer under the deprivation and the oppression, the situations of injustice, the situations of suffering that so much of modern life, of modernity, and even so-called technological progress have brought upon so many of mankind. And we would certainly hope that the next pontiff will follow in the footsteps of Pope Paul, who wrote the very famous encyclical Populorum Progressio, which was a very steady look at this social problem which had now become worldwide, the disparity between the rich nations and the poor nations, and within even the poor nations themselves, the disparity between the few rich and the many poor. There must be a Christian contribution to the attempt to solve these problems, a contribution that will
The problem of poverty exists in Africa too, but it's violence and political turmoil that's keeping the churches empty. Here in Rhodesia, gripped by a guerrilla war, congregations have been scared away. Black nationalist guerrillas see churchmen as part of the white establishment, And they've made it plain that missionaries, their workers and their flocks are legitimate targets.
Yes, are you working hard? Yes, very good.
Acts of violence by small groups of nationalists have hit both farms and villages, but missions have been the most vulnerable to attack. A typical raid was at Musami Mission, only 70 kilometers east of Salisbury, where 3 Jesuit priests and 4 Dominican nuns were assassinated last year. The Roman Catholic Archbishop of Salisbury condemned the attack as a blow not only against the missionaries, but also against the suffering and needy African people. Mr. Robert Mugabe, who's a Roman Catholic himself, denied his ZANU guerrillas were responsible. He said the guerrillas relied on the support of missionaries who believed their nationalist struggle was just. In fact, the Patriotic Front reacted to the deaths by accusing the white Rhodesian forces of Mr. Ian Smith. The front said that the Smith regime had every reason to dispose of the missionaries. The massacres haven't stopped missionaries, Protestant and Catholic, but they have undone much of their work. Father Carey runs the Shishawasha mission. With the decision by non-Catholics in the World Council of Churches to give funds to the Patriotic Front, does he think his church should now take a stand?
Oh, that's a rather loaded question, isn't it? Well, this is what I should like. That the church should not allow herself to be identified with any political movement, whether of the right or of the left, but that she should have the real freedom of Christ to speak out for God, whether this fits in with any current political movement or not. But I hate the idea of the church being identified with either African nationalism, or should we say the Rhodesian Front, although I don't think it ever has been. Just I hate the idea. We're for Christ. And all people, whatever political party they belong to, are still members of Christ. And so, should it change its views, I think it should take a strong stand on injustice in its various forms, and on violence. Violence as such and the killing of innocent people is against God's law. And I think the church should say so, even though it makes it unpopular.
There's no doubting the dedication of people like Father Carey, but the Catholic Church in Africa is short of priests, and in France only 100 men were ordained last year. Even in Rome, ordinations are rare. One major reason is the insistence on celibacy. Though some bishops in Brazil and Peru are so starved of priests, they're actually demanding that married men be allowed to join. The celibacy question is tied up with the whole issue of sexual ethics, probably the most controversial problem facing the new pope. In general, Italian bishops take a hard line on the major issues of abortion, divorce, and women priests, and Pope John Paul's unlikely to indulge in a total rethink of Rome's established attitudes. Even so, the emphasis the Pope himself can place on ethical issues and the interpretation he will give to certain rules is bound to influence the moral standards of a major segment of the world's population. Attitudes to marriage, for instance, in that most Catholic country, Italy. Though divorce in Italy has been legal since 1970, conservative Catholic groups campaigned for its abolition until 1974, when a nationwide referendum was held. The result, a 59% majority for divorce to continue, and a blow to the authority of the Church. Increasing pressure like this means that the new pontiff will have to face up to changes in society, especially with regard to the role of women. In a society that's increasingly liberal and with women having greater freedom in their lives than ever before, the Church is often at odds with its followers, many of whom say the time has come for a relaxation of the rulings on abortion and birth control. And there may be a glimmer of hope for the feminists. For in the late 60s, as Cardinal Luciani, the new Pope spent a year studying birth control problems. After considering, among other arguments, the problem of poverty and overpopulation in countries like India, he advised Pope Paul not to continue opposing the use of the contraceptive pill. Later, Pope Paul pronounced his encyclical Humanae Vitae, which went against Cardinal Luciani's advice. And, of course, the Roman Catholic ban on artificial contraception remains. India itself has a significant minority of Catholics whose conscientious objections to birth control have been unable to sway a government faced with a mushrooming population. Here, as in other parts of the developing world, there's been no shortage of experts ready to testify to what they see as the sheer folly of allowing populations to grow unchecked. Their attitude clashes head-on with that of the Roman Catholic Church, whose preoccupation with the ethics of family planning seem to ignore the harsh realities. Overpopulation and poverty go hand in hand in many parts of the world. To the Church, every baby is God's creature, and its life is sacred even before it's born. To the sociologists and population experts, though, it's another mouth to feed, another body to be clothed and housed, often under circumstances where such care is in short supply. Considered that way, Pope Paul's stand through Humanae Vitae seems curiously hard-hearted. Supporters of Paul would argue the opposite.
In his own mind, I think, and unbiased reading of the text will show us that his primary concern was the sacredness of human life, and the fact also that sex and marriage are sacred things, that they are not to be made then just another thing to be bought at the supermarket, just another good to be consumed, but that it was a fundamental human value, a basic aspect of human life.
In contrast to some Western Christian Catholic communities, I believe that this Humanae Vitae encyclical letter fitted very well to the Polish church tradition, to the Polish, I would put it this way, national tradition, and even to the social morality as it is read and urged, propagated by the Polish socialist state. I don't mean by this that there is no single Catholic woman who didn't undergo abortion, or that a practice of birth control is not well spread in this country. But I mean that even those people who commit these things, they feel it only natural that church teaches in this way.
I think most Africans, of my experience, they're all for the Pope's stand, even though they may not understand why. But then lots of people don't understand why. I mean, they think that the Pope is just merely establishing laws. He isn't. All the Pope is doing in this matter is formulating the divine law. He can't change the divine law at all. He can change all sorts of conditions which the Church itself lays down. That's his brief. But he can't change the law of God. And
while the Pope can't change the law of God, he does interpret its application to contemporary issues and speaks out accordingly. Pope John Paul says he has neither the heart of Pope John nor the cultural preparation of Pope Paul. But, though Catholics will have only briefly glimpsed him, many will already have an idea of the kind of Pope they'd like him to be.
I think perhaps the desires that have been expressed in the media for a Pope who would be open and truly, truly close to the gospel, a man truly of the gospel, and who would radiate to the whole world the message of the gospel, which is good news.
I think we're afraid of discipline. When I say we, I mean the various authorities. I think lots of people in the world today, Catholics and non-Catholics, would be delighted if there were at least a certain return to some of the old disciplinary measures of the past. And I think it's necessary too.
I believe that the new Pope is, on one side, rather reluctant to doctrinal changes. On the other side, is very open and even engaged in social affairs and social problems. And this sort of balance between some traditionalism in his theological structure, profile, and his social profile, I think is the best combination we can have for this period of church and world history.
A confident prediction, and one that was echoed every bit as warmly by the cardinals themselves, immediately after that historic announcement of Habemus Papam.
As we rejoice, we also look forward to the future with great hope, knowing full well that Pope John Paul will guide us in the way of the gospel, and that this is a blessing to all the members of God's one human family.
With God's grace and God's help and the intercession of our Blessed Lady, I think that this is the man that the Lord has sent to take us and carry us through these times before us.
Benedicat